Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan. You ever go away on vacation? Or maybe just a long weekend, a break from work. And the one thing you dread when you get back are piles and piles of paperwork. Or in my case, cases that had stacked up that, back in the day where I was trying to conduct investigations, I had phone calls coming in and people had not answered them, or they didn't have the information because, you kind of carry it around in your head. You got to do all that stuff. But just for 1 second, my friends, I want you to think about this. You're an ME investigator, maybe a pathologist as well. And you get summoned out to a location in order to examine bodies. And when I say bodies, I don't mean like one or two. I mean like over 50 contained at the same address. And it's on you to try to determine who they are, what they died of, and how long have they been here. It is a true medical legal nightmare. Brother Dave and I are going to sit down here today and we're going to tell you about something that, though I should not be shocked, it still shocks me to my core, no matter how many of these cases we cover. But it's out of Chicago, that toddling town. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. Dave Mack, I got to tell you, brother, saw this come across my desk, and I was like, what have we had? We've had parts of bodies being removed and sold. We've had Einsteins breaking into mausoleums and cracking open caskets and stealing things out of them. We've had people that have, and we've talked about this before, that have cremated remains, or alleged to have created remains, and they didn't. They just filled a conveyance up with dirt and handed it back to a family. And no matter how many of these we do, it's such a disgusting thing, I think, from my perspective as a medical legal person. But just from a human perspective, I'm thinking about, have you lost all humanity here? Did you check it at the door? I don't understand.
Here's the thing. August 6th, okay? South Chicago Chapel, 2939 East 95th Street, Chicago. Now, before we started, Joe goes, you know how big Chicago is, right? It's a big city.
It's massive.
And it is. Third largest city in America. Big city. This funeral home on Chicago's far south side was being investigated. Now, the fact that these people that are running it are even allowed to still be in this business, based on what you're going to learn over the rest of this show, is shocking enough. I believe this should never have happened because these people should have never been in a position for it to happen. Here's what I found out. 56. Wait a minute. Let me start at the very top of this where I wrote a note. Rats, maggots, stench. 56 bodies that were stacked in various stages of decomposition. They were laying there on top of one another, decaying, just decomposing in a funeral home that was a funeral home crematorium. And Joe, when I said there were 57 bodies, that's just the beginning of the story. That's the number that hits you, but there's more. It's like the Paul Harvey. And now, the rest of the story.
Yeah.
How long does it take, Joe, for a body to start to smell? And by the way, the investigation was underway from July 31st is when it began. On August 5th, The funeral director, her name is Joanna Morgan. Her funeral director license was suspended the day before the bodies were found. And the day that the police raided this building, a funeral was taking place, Joe. A woman who had been a bus driver, Chicago Transit Authority for many, many years. She was a singer. Her family was in there. And all the while, the daughter, it breaks my heart. The daughter was talking about it. She said that they were having to spray Lysol because of the smell inside this place, where they were paying to have their mother respectfully taken care of after she had left this earth. And yet, she's holding a picture of her mom, and I'm picturing her right now, because can you imagine how that would be? You're in this funeral home, your mother is there, and the smell is so atrocious that they're having to spray so much Lysol you can hear it as well as smell it. That's what was going on in this funeral home the day they raided it, Joe.
Yeah. And let me tell you something about Lysol. If you're trying to cover up smell of the dead,
that ain't the way to go.
Well, not only are you going to have to smell the smell of decomposing flesh, you're going to have to smell it accentuated by Lysol. It doesn't knock the smell down. It doesn't even mask the smell. It's weird. I've been around so many years where, I used to have a buddy that swore up and down by Vicks. He'd stick Vicks up his nose. They made it particularly famous, in that one scene in
Silence of the Lambs.
Yeah. And look, I like the smell of Vicks. It's soothing to me in the sense that I remember it from a child. I don't necessarily want to associate it with those, but it's not going to knock down the smell of decomp. Back years and years ago, you used to have cops that would, if they had a decomposing body, there were a group of cops, old timers mostly, that would walk onto the scene. They would intentionally light a cigar. And just so that they didn't have to smell it. And of course, not a good idea to smoke on any death scene because you're contaminating the scene, but that's beside the point.
Yeah. We ought to do an episode, Joe, just getting photos and film from crime scenes, probably famous crime scenes that were being investigated, where everybody was chain smoking while they were walking over the evidence,
And listen, some of those photos from a noir standpoint, the aesthetic is right on point. I love it. I mean, I just love it. I love seeing the guys in the snap brim hats.
Yeah.
Toking on a cigarette. They're out there and they're looking down a body. They're thinking about things. They're jaw jacking back and forth. None of them have shoe covers on. They don't have gloves on. And they're just sitting there.
Got a flask
and
in their pocket.
Yeah. But they got crime solved too. So I don't know what to say. But
you pointed out, you just said they weren't wearing gloves.
They weren't wearing gloves.
That never occurred to me. Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
gosh,
and it's
that's
crazy.
so sad.
It's crazy when I think about it. Some of the things I've seen out on scenes over the years, people digging through the personal effects of a decedent at a scene, looking for a pen to write with, because they left theirs back at their
Mack,
office.
You got a pen I can borrow?
Yeah.
Speak up, I can't hear you.
Yeah, or again, back when people still smoked. It's still smoke. I'm not saying that they don't, but I've seen guys tipping their cigarettes in the dead guy's ashtray in the house, and you just think about, you're asking for trouble, relative to that now, thinking about the parameters we have set up. But
we've caught so many people using DNA that came from a filter on a cigarette. Yeah,
and it is because it's so very intimate. You're thinking of that transfer. That and it'll stab a case right in the heart. You think about it.
Now it will, that's for sure. But what about this, Joe? How does this happen at a funeral home, Joe? This is right down your alley. You've got to know about what happens at a funeral home, what happens with a body. When the body arrives at the funeral home, it's either coming. Do they all go to a medical examiner? I can't imagine not, right? Mm-hmm. Some come right from the hospital?
My suspicion is this. We had a policy in New Orleans, but even to a greater degree in Atlanta, that anyone that was found dead, and that can mean a husband wakes up in the morning, his wife is dead in bed next to him. Mm-hmm. That's a found death for us.
Okay.
We're going to the scene. Chicago probably doesn't have that luxury because they deal with a lot of deaths. But with that said, my suspicion is that many of these deaths, over 50 bodies, a lot of these are going to come from nursing homes. They're going to come from hospitals. Maybe some of them came from private residences. I think my big question is, how in the name of everything holy can you find a spot to put another body? Yeah, I mean, literally. I mean, and I've worked in a lot of different facilities, had to work there, or whatever the case might be. And Dave, I had times where I had to call a refrigerated truck to store bodies because I didn't have enough space. And you run out of space really quick. You don't realize how much space a dead body actually takes up until you're around. And you can stack bodies like cordwood. I've been around when that happens. Sometimes it's just a necessity. And you stack them head to toe. So the first person laying on the ground, face up. The next one's going to go on top with the dead body's head at the ankles of the person that makes up the bottom of the stack. And you can only keep it, you have to keep the number reasonable or the whole thing will topple over. And then you have to stack them along the way. And that does happen sometimes. But I'm just thinking about a facility that's not meant to deal with a major loss of life event. And this is really important for our friends to hook into here, because let's just think about it, Dave, just for a second. Just think about this from a logical perspective. Let's say a plane falls out of the air and it's got over 50 passengers on it. Well, that you have people from the emergency management world that come in and begin to handle this, because this is a major loss of life event. There's logistically alone, it's a nightmare because you don't know what to do with all the bodies, and there's so much processing that has to go on with each body. I cannot tell you how this taxes a system like Chicago's, in addition to the fact, dude, Chicago's a pretty busy place. Cook County Medical Examiner or Coroner's Office is a busy shop, dude. They've got cases coming in all of the time. And then you inject over 50 bodies into their world that have to be processed because, Dave, I got to tell you, brother, you got over 50 bodies at a funeral home in various stages of decomposition. I'm not the only one with questions. I would think that every resident in Cook County, and maybe the adjacent counties, have questions as well. Brother Dave, I'd love to know, other than foul odor, what was it that flipped the switch on an investigation that drew the eyes of everybody there, where you've got, and the story you told off the top is horrific. It is absolutely horrific. This poor family, man, what they had to endure. And you know what I wonder? I wonder how many other families have had to go through this that had their loved ones taken care of, and they've got the smell kind of permeating throughout the place.
Every family that had a funeral at the funeral home at South Chicago Chapel in the last year has smelled that smell, Joe. It didn't just happen. And you know what? It wasn't just inside the funeral home. You realize there are neighbors to this funeral home, okay? There are people that live on that same street. I went digging back a little bit, okay? One of the neighbors complained about the smell. And one of the residents said this: I've lived here for about a year and I could smell it this entire year. It's like dead rodents, dead animals. Now think about that for just a minute. This person has lived there for the last year and has smelled it the entire time. I went back in the timeline and I looked at this, Joe, and you know what I found?
What's that, brother?
back in May, they had a community meeting about the smell. Okay? This was something that was so bad. There were whistleblowers within the funeral home community, and in this one in particular, that started leaking pictures of deceased people from February 2025. This is at not this funeral home, okay? Joanna Morgan and her husband, Clark Morgan. They're both funeral directors. Clark Morgan ran Heights Crematoria in Chicago. His wife's running this chapel here. Well, these warnings started happening early on because Clark Morgan had his license pulled for the exact same thing, Joe. That's why when you look at the funeral home that he ran, Heights, in the Heights section of Chicago,
Yeah.
got closed down for the exact same thing. Bodies decomposing. The Funeral Directors Association alerts regulators about what's going on there in early 2025. That's a year and a half ago now at the Heights. His wife, the Morgans, are operating South Chicago Chapel, where we're talking about now. This shouldn't have come as any surprise. You've just shut down the Heights a year ago. Now, and you've taken away his license. His wife is on the paperwork for this one, and the community's been smelling it for over a year. This was negligence on somebody's part. The winter of 2025-2026, from last December, January, that's when the smell really began to take overdrive. Residents around South Chicago Chapel reported a persistent foul odor that really started kicking in December.
You want to know why?
Yeah, I'm kind of curious. I was hoping you'd be able to tell me why.
Just let me interject real quick
before
you get off that point.
Yeah.
What happens in December in Chicago?
Cold weather?
It gets cold. And when it gets cold, what does everybody do? Well, they start turning on their furnaces. And any kind of central heat and air, whatever it is they have to do to stay warm. Because let me tell you something, brother. There's cold, and then there is Chicago cold. And there ain't no other kind of cold like Chicago cold. And when that temp starts to drop, if you've got decomposing human beings lying about, heat is going to affect it and accelerate that decompositional process like you cannot believe. And let me tell you what else happens at the same time. You've got rodents, and guess what they're looking for? They're looking to eat, but they're also looking for a place to set up housekeeping because they're cold too. They want to get into these environments and be around it. And let me tell you this, we've got a ready supply. We've got a ready supply of food right here.
Wow.
Belly on up, because when you look at it, it's never ending. And people say, Morgan, you mean mice and rats?
Yep.
Dead bodies? Squirrels and dead bodies. There have been cases where squirrels. So yeah, the rodent family, this is a problem. And it's mind blowing. I had to interject that though. I think that's why the smell is.
No, I was trying to figure out because you would, in my way of thinking, well, it gets cold, everybody's shutting the doors. Why would it get worse then? Now it makes sense. But here's the thing. It continued all winter long. And in the spring, I think people thought, well, maybe it'll dissipate. It didn't. It was worse. Mainly because, well, we know now why it got worse. But Joe, it was so bad. On May 20th of this year, just a couple of months ago, they had a community meeting about the odor. A major community meeting. And they brought in nearby businesses, trying to identify the source of this odor. The bad part about all of this is that there are some people that should have known to look at this funeral place. They should have known, Joe, based on the fact that, again, Joanna Morgan and her husband, Clark Morgan, are well known in this industry. And one of their other funeral home crematorias, the Heights, had been shut down for the same thing, having bodies decomposing inside. Joseph Scott Morgan, why would anybody have a funeral home with a body that is in a closet or stacked in a back room and not in a refrigerated area? What would cause that? Is there a legitimate reason or an accident that...
Brother, there is no justifiable reason for that. I mean, none whatsoever. And I read that same thing, where bodies are stuffed into closets. Are you kidding me? We put things in our closet to hang. We hide our kids' Christmas and birthday presents in the closet. There's many reasons we put things in closet. Not human beings. Not human beings. And the fact that they have them stored, that's one of the reasons I'm saying, you get up into these numbers and you're sitting there thinking, how in the world do you manage these kinds of numbers? And if you're occupying this space as well, going back to the rodents, you would have an awareness of rodent activity around this place. In addition to that, because you had mentioned this, you talked about maggots. So guess what? Even if the bodies are down in the basement, if you're officed upstairs, if you're wherever, let me tell you something, brother. The flies are going to make their way upstairs. All right. So you will have a large number of flies that a place like this would not normally expect to find. Look, I've been in a lot of funeral homes over the course of my career. The lion's share of them that I've been in are certainly cleaner than the morgue or morgues that I've worked in. Most of the time, the funeral personnel go to great lengths to make them a tolerable environment. Funeral homes provide a pay-for service, right? If your idea is that, and as we all know, those of us that have unfortunately had to pay for funerals, it's not a cheap undertaking, no pun intended. It is a very expensive thing. You're paying for a service. And along with that service, you would expect cleanliness, right? You would expect the environment to be as pleasant as, and most funeral homes, they have that in their mind. They take business classes as in mortuary science. They understand this construct. So the fact that you would allow people into your establishment and you've got flies lighting on you, or maybe you feel something brush up against your ankles as you're sitting in the chapel pew, and it's a little rat or it's a little mouse, that runs through. I'm shocked to my core over this case.
Well, the thing that gets me about this one is that you cannot, or I can't, separate the case here where we're dealing with Joanna Morgan and her husband Clark. The reason I'm pointing this out is
by the way, I'm not related to these folks, but go ahead.
Thankfully, because when you look at South Chicago Chapel and you look at all the warning signs being Joanna Morgan and her husband Clark, the number of times they've been reprimanded together and by themselves dates back years, Joe. Years. We're not talking they are having look, you don't have a quick problem if 57 bodies are decaying in your building, but when you start looking at the fact that this funeral home and the one that was shut down that Clark was running without a license, because his funeral license was revoked, okay? And he even got cited for that. But they had like 50 cremains that were never turned over to families. I don't know what the point of holding onto a body and allowing it to decompose in a building, in a room that's not refrigerated, allowing this type of thing to happen. I don't know why somebody would withhold doing their job. And the cremains, why are you holding on to cremains? Are you waiting for payment? Is that what this is? Is that the families couldn't afford to pay for what was done, or couldn't afford to pay for the funeral or pay for the embalming? I mean, what could cause this to happen? Okay. You're not going to tell me that 57 bodies were just falling apart in there, Joe, and that these guys were cashing checks and not performing services, because that would be a different thing altogether.
Yeah, here's the thing that I don't understand. First off, funeral homes are, you, bodies just don't magically show up at funeral homes.
Right.
You know how that process works? I know you do, brother. I'm just throwing this out there, but
Mhm.
you got to make a phone call. Hey, Mr. Smith, I want to avail myself of Smith and Brothers Funeral Home Services, right? This is a family that's making the phone call, all right? That switch has to be flipped somewhere along the way. It's not like the guy's out there in his hearse and he's cruising up and down the road and he's saying, hey, you guys got any dead bodies? You know, you want to give
Just
me
laying around?
like the Monty Python thing, bring out your dead, that's not the way it happens. They don't go out trolling for dead bodies. So if we start at that point along the timeline when somebody dies, who drops the dime to make these arrangements? Well, first off, in many nursing homes, if someone is in residence at a nursing home, guess what? One of the things has to be included in the record, because there's an expectation somebody's probably going to pass away. What's your preference for a funeral home? And it's really morbid, but that's the reality of it. So that's been written somewhere at some point in time. Hospital. Well, hospital's not going to hang on to a body indefinitely. Okay. They're not. They don't do that. You know, they don't provide this because they have patients that come in all the time. They have people that die all the time. If your loved one dies, you know, our social worker here in the hospital will help you make arrangements.
They do. They come to you. They sit down with you because I just went through this last year, and they go through. Now, we had things taken care of, so I didn't have to deal with it, but they're prepared to talk to you about all the different options that you have.
Everything that's out there.
Yes. And
so
it's amazing.
Yeah. Investigatively, I'm really wondering, where is this broken down? Because look, it pretty much goes without saying that this is not somebody I would trust. All right. But it goes much deeper, much deeper than the actions that someone, seems like these folks, allegedly, of their own free will, decided to either act upon, or should I say, not act upon. Brother Dave, have I ever told you what a cool room is?
No, but I thought you're talking about my studio then. So,
It is.
What is a cool room, Joe?
A cool room is actually a location that is not quite a morgue setting with coolers, but it is a separate location that funeral homes will have. And it's generally outside of their prep room where they actually do the embalming, where the temperature is like dropped significantly. And if we can drop temp down, we can kind of retard the progression of decomposition. You slow it. Okay.
I thought, well, when a body is embalmed, doesn't that isn't that a large part of stopping?
It is. And I am absolutely going to get to that. But the first stop along the way is, okay, we take the body from the hospital, from the nursing home, or somebody's home. We take it to the funeral home. We might have 3 embalming tables here. This one's going to have to wait in line because we're working through these. It's like an assembly line, okay? But they're in the cool area. They're not going to degrade a lot at that point in time. You get them up on the table, and here's what you're getting at. This is not rocket science, okay? All right? To embalm a body. No offense to my friends out in mortuary sciences, but there are circumstances where bodies have been greatly traumatized. It's hard to pick up a vessel. I understand that. But it's a pretty simple process, particularly if you're trained to do it. I could not do it. That's why our friends in mortuary sciences go to school for this. So at a baseline here, brother, at a baseline, when you roll a body into your facility, you never know what's going to happen with families. I mean, how many times have you and I both heard, well, we've got to wait for Aunt Susie to come in from Seattle, and we're in Alabama, and she can't get here for 3 days. That happens, okay? They're not going to leave the loved one just lying around unembalmed. They're going to go ahead and embalm the body. That's what I don't understand. And we're talking about, the bodies are not perfused with liquid gold. This is not like, we're not talking the chemicals that it takes, okay, to do this are not as expensive as you think. It's time consuming. You have to be exacting about it, and you have to get the body thoroughly embalmed. But there's no reasonable explanation why a body that rolls up to this facility shouldn't be embalmed immediately. But Dave, what I'm hearing though is that these bodies are not embalmed. I'm hearing about it borders on what I'm hearing about liquefaction.
Yeah.
And it doesn't surprise me.
Back up and explain that to us, Joe, because I saw that too, and I thought, how long? I mean, how long are we talking about when you start mentioning liquefaction? You're talking about a body that is breaking down.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, at a cellular level. Yeah.
So how long? I mean, if I die now and nobody finds me for the next week, how bad am I going to be?
Bad.
Okay.
Bad, really bad.
I'm already halfway decomposed as it is, so there you go.
Come on now. I'm not buying that. So yeah, after a week, you'd be really bad. You wouldn't be viewable.
Okay.
You wouldn't,
that tells
because
me, yeah. Okay,
it's just
good.
the color changes that take place in a body. And here's the other thing, because I got to tell you, the more I'm kind of thinking about this, I have to consider. There's only one or two possibilities. Are they using these bodies as leverage for payment? You had mentioned this, and and the thing about it is, I've heard this before. I've heard that funeral homes will hold on to bodies until they get paid. Okay, now there's one thing. It's one thing to hold onto a body because you want to make sure that you're going to get paid, because it's a costly event. Okay, however, if that's what's going to happen, the body has to be embalmed, okay? Because there's no going back from that. And even if you have religious objections to that, let's just say that you're part of some religious sect that doesn't believe in embalming. Well, at the funeral home, that's all fine and good, but that's a luxury as far as they're concerned for you, if that's your belief. Because if you're not showing up with the jack, and you're expecting the funeral home to hold on to the body, that's problematic, because the body's got to be embalmed. Either that or the body's got to go back into the refrigerator somewhere, if you can find one.
Wow.
Not every funeral home has a refrigerator, or cooler. But I don't think that you're going to tell me that all 50 plus bodies here, the families all have religious objections to embalming. I ain't buying it. I'm not buying it. I don't think that's the case, brother.
Well, again, going back to the investigation, okay, the investigation began on July 31st. That's when the official timeline begins. They received information at the state agency that potentially operational concerns at South Chicago Chapel. We're talking about paperwork here, state, and so the agency opens up the investigation, the complaint, and they start. And when they show up, Joe, how long do we document this smell? A year. It was so bad they had a community-wide meeting months before this. So imagine how bad it is now. And on August the 5th, this is where we were talking about the poor lady whose mother was having their funeral for her mom. When everybody shows up to lock this place down, they were having a funeral. How bad did it have to be? They August 5th, they suspended Joanna Morgan's funeral director license and embalming license too, by the way. And I throw that out there because it doesn't look like she was doing a lot of embalming. The reason for the license suspension was extraordinarily serious, in that the agency concluded that her continued practice posed a danger to the public, and they alleged that she allowed multiple decedents to be kept unrefrigerated in deplorable conditions with rodent infestation, resulting in decomposition and maggot infestation. Bodies in a room.
Yeah.
Closet.
Yeah. And listen, these bodies have been feasted on. I'll put it to you this way. If they're talking
Mhm.
about rodent activity, that's what they're going to. You will have rodents running about, but that's not the full story here. You're talking about, and so with Cook County, the Cook County medical examiner, they literally had to send out teams of forensic pathologists and investigators to go to the funeral home. Most of the time, if you can get a a forensic path to go out somewhere, it's for a very specific kind of case, where it might be rather complex, where you want them to be able to see the body in place before you remove the body to go back to the morgue, because it's a very complex, maybe multiple gunshot wounds, lots of physical evidence. You want to see the body in its pristine state. That's not what we're talking about here. Remember how I mentioned just a moment ago, this is like a mass fatality event?
Right.
Well, it is a mass fatality because we've got a lot of dead folks. But their purpose in going out there, Dave, they had to come fully armed. And I don't mean like weapons. I'm talking about with all of their gear, because from Jump Street, they've got to figure out who these people are. I was thinking about what would be the upside. Well, if they died in a nursing or hospital facility, there's still a chance that they'll have a plastic bracelet on. But just because somebody has a plastic bracelet on, if they've been down a year, how are you going to validate that? Are you going to have to go through here and do DNA sampling on each one of these bodies and have questioned family members to do this? Oh, and by the by, not mentioning the 50 cremated remains or cremains that have not been turned over to the family. How are you going to get them identified? Rely on what the funeral directors are telling you about, well, yeah, they're in vase number 56013. Really? Am I supposed to believe you based upon your record keeping? Because I got to tell you, if you're telling me that that's who is in this receptacle here, I'm looking at what you've done with everything else downstairs. I'm not going to trust you as far as I can throw you. So this is a hell of a mess that Cook County finds themselves in, relative to this. And one more thing, because what I understand is that these two individuals have not been hooked up on charges as we're speaking right now. But Dave, for every single body that's there, okay? And I'm just talking about relative to how the body has been handled. That's a count, a criminal count. The fine, I think, is like $10,000. We haven't even started. If these people took money, in order to provide a service, guess what? That's fraud. Now you're going to have feds involved in it. Well, the state of Illinois will be involved in it. But what I'm saying is you're talking about very, very serious charges. They could be staring at something that could go on and on forever. I mean, as far as like, you ain't going to be in the funeral home business any longer. This is one of those cases, Dave, or I say one, I hate to do that. I don't want to dismiss the dead here because each individual case, this is a message sending case. The state attorney general's office, Cook County prosecutor, state health department, who is involved in this thing, as well as the medical examiner, and by the by, the police, they've got to send a message with this, because you're talking about somebody that felt comfortable enough to abuse, and this is abuse of all of these remains. It's an abuse of a corpse, and not to mention all the other stuff that's connected with these families, not to mention everybody that had a funeral service in this place, Dave, that was subjected to all of this.
And add to that, Joe, that again, it's a married couple, Joanna Morgan and her husband, Clark Morgan. And they owned another place, and it was shut down for the same reason. So you've got years of abuse of the corpse. They've got, even right now, as we're recording this show, 19 of the 56 bodies have been identified. That's it. And think about it. These are bodies in a funeral home that should have been, taken care of. And yet they're having to go through this whole identification process because of how bad things are. 19 identified, 16 families have been notified. 3 of the decedents have been identified, and families have been able to get them released to other funeral homes so they can now have a funeral. But still, 37 bodies as we record this show today. 37 bodies unidentified. 37.
I sit there and I wonder what are the potential hold ups with these things, and if you're talking about, and again, not knowing the status of the bodies at the scene, when they're observed, here's something else. If these bodies have been allowed to decompose adjacent to one another or on top of one another, you could have commingled remains out there, Dave, where you're talking about a forensic anthropologist having to get involved in this. And I'll give you one even better than that. This kind of thing doesn't just start. It has to have a beginning somewhere. So if someone's trying to sell me on the idea that, yeah, this has only been going on for, 18 months, I'm calling BS. I'm calling BS right here. What I think is that there is a high probability as an investigator, I'd be looking at this. How many other cases have they been involved with over the years? And I want to track back to find out what's the disposition on each of these other remains. What'd you do with the bodies? Where are they? Can you prove to us that these were actually buried or cremated or whatever the case might be? And let me tell you one more thing. If there are other bodies, they got a perfect way to get rid of a body. Cremation. I mean, all you got to do is, there's plenty of bodies of water around Chicago. You talk about cremains. I'm not saying they did this. I'm just saying somebody in similar circumstances could avail themselves of rendering down a body and walk into a lake shore or to a river or any of these other places and dump those. Who's gonna know? Who's gonna know? So I'm coming at this, Brother Dave, from the perspective of an investigator that has got this massive puzzle, disgusting, massive puzzle that you're trying to piece back together and figure out the histrionics on this whole thing. I would just love to know how long all of these establishments have been in business. I'd like to know if there's anybody else that was involved with it that are in fact licensed by the state of Illinois.
Well, I can give you one on South Chicago Chapel. It only opened in 2022, Joe. Only a couple of years. Heights didn't open before that.
Yeah. And I wonder, I got to tell you,
Years.
I wonder how do you get this far behind? And if it is something as, and I'll use the word insidious, as using a body as leverage with a grieving family, let me tell you something. I don't know if there's enough anger in the world to describe that, because if it was my loved one, the person I'd held dear for all those years, maybe held me even when I was an infant and rocked me and soothed me, and they're allowed to rot in some filthy basement somewhere or stuffed back in a closet, gotta tell you, I got questions. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags.